So hello everybody, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. It's great to see such a packed house for this round table organized by the DERBI cluster, which is in Pennsylvania. Wanted to talk about supply of energy communities. There really is a real movement in the region for this self-supply notion and the notion of an energy community. So it's all growing very nicely in this region. And so that means that we are curbing the increase in the price of electricity. And it is needs to be encouraged even further as a way of combating not having access to energy. See, there's a different way of tackling and humanity in the question of energy, and that's really important. I have Frédéric Leclerc, who is a lawyer from a firm called Enogrid. So there you are, he's raising his hand there. He's going to tell us everything all about the legal ins and outs, and there are many ins and outs pertaining to these ways of producing and consuming energy. Then we've got Clémence Suide-Pancelin, who works for the Energy Citizens Network, well, that's a translation into English, and you're going to be shaking things up a little bit. And then we work for your who is in charge of the smart grids, and he's going to talk technical to us. Benoît Froiduro. Then we've got David incidences and of self you've got underway, and you're going to give us some feedback. With us, who's Fenouillèdes Regional Nature Park, solar panels at the bottom of a chateau, and then we've of Enogrid and their speciality in business zones, self energy consumption and yeah, that's right. We're going to talk about that today, but we do work in other areas as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here for our roundtable. We're going to kick off right now. Frédéric Leclerc, working for the firm Innova, of supply and how it's growing. And I'm going to hand the floor over to you. So off you go, Frédéric Leclerc. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Amount of time to show you self-supply. Talking now about the legal framework for self-supply, I think, first of all, it really is very important to understand what a collective self-supply operation is, because the legislation must reflect that, particularly on the players involved in collective self-supply and the relationships between them. Collective self-supply has two sides to it. Self-supply is more or less easy to understand. It means that you produce energy, renewable energy, and that renewable energy is then consumed by whoever's produced it. Or it can be divided up in between different consumers by the body that produced that renewable energy. This collective self-supply, or self-supply, can be individual or collective. I'm not going to talk about the individual side of things because that's not what we're here to talk about today. So the producer, the owner of the house, puts PV panels on the roof of the house and then consumes the energy thus produced entirely or in part. As for collective self-supply, this is another type of self-supply, and it involves several players. So I think now is the time to sweep away a preconception that it's definitely collective if there are many players. It can be, in fact, different. You can have individual self-supply with many participants. Let's take an example that we don't come across very, very often. But imagine you've got a block of flats. You've got 5 owners who set up PV panels on the roof, and they all consume the energy that is produced by the panels. If the energy is then divided between the different owners within the block of flats, that would be individual self-supply. However, to make that into a collective thing, there have to be many players involved, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But with collective self-supply, the energy is placed on the grid, the public grid. It is transferred through that grid. In other terms, you're not sharing the electricity between those people who generated it in their. For there to be collective self-supply, the rule is that they have to have at least 2 actors. There has to be a producer, at least those 2 parties. So that is what players, even in reality, there are 2 players involved. You've got one which orchestrates the whole operation. That is the organising. And there is a public grid. Here, for example, that would be Enogrid, which manages the public grid, which allows electricity to be transferred. So I would say that there is another party that is not on this diagram, but which exists, and that is a third-party investor. Very often, the party that is considered to be the producer will not be the party that put the PV power station in place. That is done by a third party, which is the third-party investor, and that party will rent the rooftop over a depot, for example, settle the panels up there, get them running, will take care of the maintenance, and that third-party investor will then rent out the installation to the people in the block of flats. So the infrastructure does not belong to the people in the block of flats. They're just renting it. And so what is the relationship that will develop between these different parties? Well, we've got the producer, who is in charge of producing that renewable energy shared out, and that are determined is a special and this system is decided body of collective self-supply, which is the organising party. So this organising party involves the consumers and the producers and determines who gets what. And it's this special party as well, manages the relationships between the producer and the consumer. And this body also serves as an interface between collective self-supply and the national grid, because the manager of the system has a very important role here because the organising party tells or determines how the energy is distributed between the consumers. But if the consumers don't have enough energy with renewable energies, they need to round up the electricity which is provided from the collective self-supply system. That's going to be rounded off by energy that comes from an electricity supplier. They need to have a contract in place for that. So there are going to be different flows of electricity. Some will come from a contract, electricity from the national grid. So because the energy that is produced by facilities go onto the and then will be electricity that comes to come from their collective self-supply. Be very advantageous and covered by electricity which will come through the same cables but will be provided by the usual electricity board. So those are the different players that are involved. Well, it sounds very complicated to me. How long does it take to set up such a structure in legal terms? Well, to set this up, well, you the characteristics of, and then with which we'll probably be hearing about, you have to get the organising part legal form of which association. So an and then the different contracts have to be signed for this collective self-supply. So I would say that you also have to declare your installations and your operations to the national grid and to other different authorities as well. Oh, on you go. Please continue. Well, when we're talking about regulations, I'm not going to bombard you with too many legal texts. But what I would like to say, I just want you to understand two things, in fact. Firstly, this collective self-supply is based in a law passed in 2000. It's a very short law, and it is founded to consume the electricity. Then there was a whole series of laws that are still in vigor today, because according to French law, which is governed by European law, and we have laws in France that implement European laws into French law. We've got different decrees which have been produced, and it's going at top speed, all of these laws and decrees. So is the legal framework today satisfactory? Is it prudent to launch such an operation? Is it sufficiently fluid? Well, I think the legal framework has evolved a lot. If we take a look back at September 2023, there was a new decree which extends the geographical parameter within which a collective supply operation can take place. But without going into detail, I would say that the legal be decided. It's not really taxes. Progress is to be made. Systems fear, and this is their main fear. Your neighbour is not in agreement. but there are only very few. I think collective self-supply, well, as the individual self-supply. Yes, but collective self-supply will naturally take longer to put in place compared to the individual self-supply, whereas there are fewer parties involved. And individual self-supply started in 2015. Collective self-supply only started in 2019. And there's all this organizational framework with Enogrid in France and the different players in the grid. Such a lot of things have to be set up so that collective self-supply can really kick off in comparison to its growth. And the growth is very encouraging in both types of self-supply. Yes, one speed. Have to collective self-supply. These also possible in fine-tuned. We can see how it's rules that govern a co-owned building. The system is also feasible for businesses. For example, in Perpignan, there is a project, Agora Sun, which pertains to a whole series of businesses. I think there are about 15 or 20 businesses which are going to be linked together in collective self-supply. And of course, there is the public sector, the communal sector. You'll be hearing about different projects between different communes within the Fenouillèdes nature park. So all of these different frameworks should boost collective self-supply infrastructures. However, it's important to understand, and I echo what has just been said, that up until now, we've been just towed along in the wake of these legal texts. They're still being worked upon. And here I can offer a bridge to what's going to be said in the future. These collective self-supply systems are appropriate to energy communities, for renewable energies, for citizen energy systems, and the legal framework of these communities is currently being described. Well, thank you very much for that information, Frédéric Leclerc. Let's move on. You run the Énergie Citoyenne for ECLR Occitanie. So, collective self-supply system is set up. You can tell us that. I think you've got the remote control there for your slides. Be able to see the screen in front of you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. So yes, I run ECLR Occitanie. So we work with citizen cooperatives, and we've been doing that for the past 8 years now. The shared energy movement has existed for several years now. I'm going to talk about concrete examples out in the field. What happens when you set up such a collective self-supply operation? First of all, you have to be committed to do it out in the field, to do what is like a farmer's basket with watts and voltage in it. And you have to understand where the energy comes from that we use when we switch on our coffee machine in the morning. So you are cultivating electricity together. You're nurturing electricity. Yes, in fact, then we ramp up the details, but this is, we're not really changing baskets of tomatoes. We have rules. The flows of energy are a bit more complex than growing tomatoes on your balcony and then exchanging them with your neighbor. And so we have started off with this rather lovely dream of growing electricity together. We have to shift into something which is economically and legally solid. So it needs a lot of time, and you have to teach the citizens, and they have to really embrace the notion. So it has to, the citizens have to really embrace the notion of every aspect. So this illustration is on our website, but it really reiterates what has already been said. And so you've got this organizing party, we call it a PMO. It has to determine the rules between the different producers and the different consumers. And so it's not a straight timeline, as you can see on the screen there. These are rather meandering lines here because there are ups and downs in this kind of operation. So there are lots of different stages. There are technical stages, of course, and you need to have these production plants. They may exist or you may have to create them. So you have to carry out technical studies, and then there are feasibility studies for the economics of the project. And what I want to show here is that there are a lot of times where the human being is really involved. Yes, of course we have legal contracts. Yes, of course we'll make sure there is economic equilibrium. But we also have social contracts when we are sharing our energy. So you have a lot of public meetings. Oh, yes, we have embraced the notion. The town hall wants to start this project. Is to the citizens, and you really have to, sometimes you can have a few residents who knock on the mayor's door, talk about it and want to get more citizens on board. Sometimes it comes from the town hall. But to get back to why these collective self-supply operations are difficult. They aren't everywhere, but people are keen to have them. Well, the initial motivation comes from your energy bills, because a lot of electricity, the electricity costs are going up, and citizens no longer want to have to just suffer these bills, which are going up the whole time. They want to be in control of their electricity bills. We're not necessarily going to say that instantly we're going to bring down the bills, but we are going to control part of the bill. And that is what people want to do when they get involved in collective self-supply. But it's not the only reason. It's also a desire to be in charge. This is a notion which comes through in everything we do. Get back in charge to make sure that the electricity you consume is produced locally, in what conditions it is produced, and to work collectively. You can see that nice little picture up on the screen there. We've got Marianne, the figure of France, there in charge of the electricity. And to do it together. So you've got this Marianne figure, which represents France, but it's not just the state that's doing it. All of the citizens are involved. And so when you set up a collective self-supply system, we have to make sure that you can identify everything that happens. There are so many questions. I've got a question here, a guy here with looking rather bewildered with many questions. I think we all feel a bit like that chap. We can what it's about. So there are many questions to be addressed, and so these are some of the questions that might arise, i.e., pricing. Sooner or later, you'll say, well, what kind of price are we going to sell the energy at? Are all consumers going to pay the same price per kilowatt hour? That is one question to be addressed. In some operations, there might be a donation of some parts of energy. We want to foster solidarity through pricing. The price, how do we determine what a fair price is? Fair for the consumer? Of course, it has to be advantageous to the consumer to get them on board the project, but also for the producer, because we don't want the poor old producer to have to do all of these. We don't want the thing to be too complicated for the producer, otherwise they'll just sell all the energy to the national grid. We need everything to be very transparent. That is very important. The consumer has to be aware of all of the charges that the producer has to cover, etc. There are many other questions. There's technical questions on the buildings which are going to be fitted out, or it's not always on the roof. We've got some on the ground, PV panels on the ground. Legal status. What is the legal status of your association, for example? At the Fenouillèdes project, we've got a whole lot of lawyers working on this. And we have lots of workshops which people can participate in so that they can understand what the rules are, how we take decisions throughout the entire, who's making the decisions, and we have to decide who's going to take the decisions right at the very get-go, and it's very practical. When you supply energy, then you have to figure out what you're going to do with people who don't pay their bills. You have to determine the rules for the consumers who do not pay their bills. It's very practical, very down to earth. And what about someone who moves house? Leave the system, of course, someone who moves house or someone who wants to exit the system for some other reason, then you have to be able to manage that. So as someone who moves in, lots of people wanting to join the community, what do? You have to sort out all of these issues before you sign the statutes of your organising party. What else can I add? Well, as you will have understood, well, there are some photos on the screen there. In the Corbières Fenouillèdes Nature Park. I'm showing you these because these are the workshops that I was telling you about to get people on board. And so there are many, many meetings in the evening, for example, where all of these enthusiastic people come to a room to talk about their collective self-supply system. It sounds crazy, but we do attract a lot of people, the mayors, councillors, businesses, residents. There are many, many parties involved, as you can see. There are a lot of men in the room, as you can see in the photo. Yes, a lot of grey hair. Is it in the room there? Did in that? Well, you can see the panel here. I think I don't need to. I didn't. Analysts up here. So, and the dialogue make clear these. Corbières Fenouillèdes Nature Park with Texol and another company, and we have the Innova law firm as well. We need different parties. We can do the intermediary role so that all everything that is written down by Texol, all the legal advisors, everything is understood, and that the decisions are taken by the people who are involved in the project. That is the big challenge here. We want to have the decisions taken by those who are going to keep the operation up and running. And so, as you will have understood, in what I've said, there's a lot of dialogue, and we note that with the collective self-supply taking off, it's not always, and I'm getting back to answer the question, it doesn't mean that it's local players and local authorities that are taking this subject to heart. When we've got an operation, the economic factor is, in this operation, are the consumers only the only investors? If this is the case, then that begs some questions, because they have cheaper electricity when they have plenty of money to invest, and those people who are not as rich, they would not be benefiting from the operation. So we're creating ghettos of the rich in some ways, but the question is, are we opening these operations so that local energy can be given to people who do not have enough money to invest in solar energy? So that's the whole goal of collective self-supply. No, it's not. No, some people say I've got have that cheaper. That's fine if you want to invest. If everybody can share that. It is important because the pricing is very important. How are you going to share out this energy? And we're not going to say that the first one to switch their lights on has all of that energy, or the baker in the corner in the neighborhood, he should be able to benefit from a bigger slice of the energy cake that we are producing. So that could be another type of solidarity which we can recommend.
Un peu plus complexe.
You could also have a slightly more complex algorithm that defines that the neighborhood's bakers has his share of the cake. Now, how do you get decisions organized? It has to be reflected upon from the onset. Do you have a General Assembly taking all decisions? Do you have a small board making all decisions? Is it a delegate that takes technical as well as strategic decisions. The question has to be asked in terms of governance, who is going to make decisions? And it would be appropriate to strike the appropriate balance. If you create a new dynamics on the territory, it also has to have positive fallbacks on the community. So it must be accompanied by measures to facilitate transport, mobility. Now, in terms of flexibility, I do ceramics as a hobby. If I can produce cheaper electricity, am I going to buy an oven to use when I do my ceramics? So it wouldn't be that positive in terms of impact. So you have to ask those questions so as to make sure that citizens are the owners of the process. We are managing human beings. We've been doing it in my organization for years. It seems quite complex, but we want self-supply, collective self-supply to work. We are very lucky because we have fundings from ADEM and from the Occitania region, so we can help people launching their projects. So if you want to launch projects in Occitania, please come to us. We will support you. We have counterparts in other regions as well. Clémence, you're very passionate, and I think your message was heard. We talked about legal aspects with Frédéric Leclerc. We talked about human aspects with Clémence. Now with Benoît Froidero, we are going to speak about techniques and optimization. So once everything's in place, you want to optimize energy consumption, including using digital tools. So can you explain about this? Yes, well, digital tools cover a wide variety of things. I'm not going to talk about blockchain or AI because these have become generic terms and they are losing their substance. In CEA, we do applied research, and those themes are what we are dealing with. I am based in Chambéry, in Le Bourget, and I'm in charge of integrating networks. I specialize in electric networks, but we have colleagues working on other types of networks. So this is directly connected to what you said about self-supply. And I tend to work on other aspects. So we take into account all the constraints of a number of actors, and I'm quite happy to hear what everyone said this morning. I brought my slides. Yes, you are managing the smart grid department. Yes, we have about 100 people working in 3 labs. One lab is dedicated to smart grids. Another lab works on energy storage, and the third one focuses more on self-supply in buildings, buildings being the bricks of the grid. They are equipped with batteries and solar panels, but also the building as such are a wonderful reserve for energy, for hot water, but also thermically. The building can be used to smooth consumption peaks. You can use the material of the building to regulate the temperature. So if you have a good building, it's very comfortable for users, and you can reduce consumption peaks. I will give some examples in the end of this presentation. All of us have been reflecting on self-supply. The distance of 2 kilometers is being changed. It's going to reach 5 or 10 kilometers. That's a fairly recent change, and it shows that we will be able to enlarge our work, and not only in towns but also in rural areas. Let's also keep in mind the grid, Enedis. They've been working very hard. It's a very strong grid. I've been working in many countries, and I can tell you that in the US, for instance, or in the Arabic Peninsula, or in other parts of the world, their grids are not very stable. But we do have a very strong and stable grid in France, thanks to Enedis. And they are providing this grid for self-supply. And Enedis remains at the very heart of changes in this country. Some producers produce 2 or 3 megawatts. They may be residential producers, but they could also be plants, power plants, solar panel plants, and they have their share of this self-supply phenomenon. With Enedis, there is a community of energy with a number of players, and in the coming few years, there will be even more players and more dimensions to this. Yes, Renault manufacturer is going to a car. Will be an electric vehicle with B2B technology. Yes, much has been said about that, but we are still waiting to see that car. Is one of the elements that could bring some flexibility to the grid. If you take into if you accept that your car is going to be part of the cycle several times a day, yes, perhaps, why not? Perhaps there will be some fundings and subsidies, and people will get interested. But no, it's a bit early to talk about that. So we are creating communities of energy, and this is at the heart of the process with the various customers. We focus on the technical parts and system modeling. We work on how we can model this. I use the word of digital twin. I'm referring to genuine twins, simple models that can operate in real time with what they represent. They're not simple models. Whether it be PV houses or buildings, we're going to model the thermal aspects of buildings so as to limit the number of batteries and take advantage of inertia of the material of the buildings themselves, because batteries are very costly. They don't work forever, and it's gray energy as well. So we want to avoid having too many batteries around. Avia is the infrastructure, it's the research infrastructure. All these elements, we have the capacity to model them with different degrees of modelization. And we also develop EMS, energy management systems. And thanks to our models, we can provide scenarios, energy scenarios at the scale of an area or a territory or community, so as to anticipate on energy price or alteration of batteries, or we can also modelize the effect of V2G in vehicles. If we have a model over 5 years, we can see how much we're going to use a vehicle and to what extent we're going to optimize it. We can also anticipate on the lifespan of the grid elements so as to make better use of equipment and prolong their lifespan. We can also include pricing scenarios, anticipate on things. When Vladimir Ukraine on the energy market and now acts in thinking of energy in our territories. Strength, information, PV. You take into account all the tools and more stuff coming to life, and they anticipate on our energy consumption in the future. We also modelize our behaviors. We modelize the electrical vehicle loads, and it's not easy to modelize because it depends on human beings. When you have some sockets in a supermarket's car park, you cannot know how many people are going to use them today or tomorrow. So there are some elements of uncertainties, but we take all those dimensions into account and we implement EMS so as to collect data and produce optimization algorithms so as to target our actions, and we can manage our assets more efficiently. This is what we are doing in our labs now. Mentioned that we are talking the can you increase that? Wouldn't it? When we talk about optimizing, it means how are we going to optimize one criteria, taking into account the constraints in terms of price, PV production, and so on. And you try to identify local or global optimal scenarios. And with our tools, we try to optimize some phenomena with costs, of course, all of it. Entities or electric last year, it was your electric. So delays by numbers. We are witnessing aggregation phenomenon. People are putting services together and offering services to RTE. Spot types of markets whereby we can buy electricity where and when it is cheaper. So I tried to present things in simple words, but it's quite a complex phenomenon. Electric vehicles. Actually, at present, 40% of the electricity, of the energy used, comes from oil. Now this has to shift to electric energy, so it's a major change. On the other side, electric vehicles will boom in the next few years in the world. We will have around 300 million electric vehicles, and we have only a few years, 5 or 6 years time to get ready to supply those vehicles with a very strong grid, which will be overstretched in the coming years. So we try to develop self-supply for vehicles. Can you figure out a solar canopy on a car park? If there is a cloudy weather around lunchtime, you still want to supply those vehicles parked in this car park at lunchtime without overstretching the grid. So we've got to take such elements into account. We use our models to optimize that. I'm referring to a PV aspect, but it can be used for other types of supplies and constraints. So we use digital tools in order to plan the needs for users, and on a company car park, we want to know how many vehicles will be there and how many vehicles need to be reloaded. In the future, we will learn by doing, and we will develop some machine learning on our equipments. And in the future, we will not even have to ask how much energy we need at a given time. So these VE loads have been applied in the site of Cadarache, the industrial site of Cadarache. We've had various layers of data collection, and this will be further developed. And this is the very core of our business. So, as a conclusion, we use the digital to seize a situation, to make better use of it and modelize it so as to develop new models, because in the future we will all need our little to be supplied this way. Exactly. And our systems will become more and more complex. And this is true for private houses as well as for industrial centers. Issue. Thank you very much. Thank you for Benoit for this great presentation. Now let's talk about the daily life of a developer. David, incidences and self-supply daily life and to at a smaller scale. Represent incidents. We develop solar plants and wind plants as well. I heard people mentioning how we could become the owners of our electricity. It is true that collective self-supply is a wonderful tool for our people to own not only their energies but also their potential at the local level. We work on self-supply and rural areas because self-supply has been first developed in urban areas. It seemed very easy and normal to have solar panels on big buildings in town to begin with. And collective self-supply has two limits at present: a geographical kind of limit, because up to recently you couldn't reach out more than 2 kilometers away. Now the legislation is changing, and depending on specific areas in rural areas, you can extend this perimeter to 10 or 20 kilometers, which could encourage the development of collective self-supply in rural areas. And it could change in the future, but at present there's a limit of 3 megawatts supplied onto the grid. But 3 megawatts is more than enough for a small village, but in the area of Fos-sur-Mer, it is too limited. Now, if you benefit from a waiver, you can request a waiver from the ministry, but if you have that waiver, you can set up solar panels not only on houses but also in plants, methanization plants, for instance, and that could contribute to further developing this ownership, including in rural areas, so people could master their own energy bills, and it will be of interest for industrial areas. Yes, you are mentioning for EV plant. If 3 megawatt would clearly not be enough. Exactly. So beyond all this, I have 2 examples which I would like to share with you. We are currently working in the region of the Landes in Gironde. And when we prepared this conference, you asked me to come with wine, didn't you? Area of the reached a great level of maturity. They've had PV plants for a number of years, and they want to keep developing as a producer of electricity. They don't want to stick to national objectives. Enlarge their action. They want to integrate their projects into the daily life of their citizens. It's a very ambitious program with various PV components. They are developing projects with partners, including the community of communes of the Landes, and they have created a semi-economic community with a regional player and an industrial player. So the question is, how can you make sure that electricity will serve the interests of citizens and of the local communities? Oh, well, there is a wide number of PV parks included in the program. Perhaps 6 of them. 6 of them are being under development right now. So we wanted to integrate on each of these plants a collective local loop. This would be 20 kilometers loops. In that rural area, we may benefit from that ministerial waiver, which I mentioned. So the question was, how can you include all the citizens on the territory in this offer in a consistent and competitive way, in a balanced way for all citizens, whether you live in Eré or Saint-Justin or in Cachennes, the various villages that make up that territory. So for each of the plants, if you have a 10 megawatt plant, you can take 1 or 2 megawatts, which you dedicate to a collective self-supply offer in that. And if you handle this well, which is the purpose of it, because the local authorities are now each of that could benefit. This communicate, spread the information. I was interested when I heard about PNR workshops. We will have many workshops to organize so as to advocate for this project. But it's a wonderful tool for us when appropriately applied at political level. It can be very helpful on the territories, and it can encourage spreading those tools in rural areas.
It was for the citizens to see that it really comes down to have to embrace the project. Yes, indeed. Challenge for town planning, specify that and which is owned by to share out the different locations of these plants, and we can launch requests to express interest. And the lady I'm sitting next to was talking about governance. So the Armagnac region is part and parcel of the governance of the project. That had to be so if we're talking about collective self-supply. As things stands today, the project, we have a private operator, of course, elected right at the very beginning of the process, and out to the entire and the association that work with the industrial board, and then each embrace the project. It's one example. Well, if you wouldn't mind being quick. Well, we have a loop in our neighborhood. Here we have, there's another concern. There's a water board was rather concerned. This is south of France. And they wanted to cope with their electricity bills shooting through the roof, because when you're working with drinking water, you have to pump the water. They're all stocked in water towers, often up in the mountains, and the pumping bills were going up out of the roof. And so there are a lot of factors where you see that the bills are increasing. I don't want the drinking water bills to explode also, even though the costs for me have gone through the roof. And so we wanted to have individual self-supply, putting PVs on the roof. Well, you can't say, well, your pumps are at the back of the valley, and the geography of the land is too difficult, and your rooftops are very narrow compared to your electricity needs. And so here we turn towards production in an area which has more sunlight, which is at a better scale for the consumption. And there we deliver the electricity through the grid. And so this is one way of moving towards collective self-supply. In terms of regulation, that's the easiest outlet. For collective self-supply as well, all in the different villages. Way of redesigning individual self-supply. So we've got this wave for the 20-kilometer radius, which means that we can turn individual self-supply into collective self-supply out in rural areas. So it's delocalization, really. You can move production 15 kilometers away, and you can shower a whole geographical zone with this collective self-supply. Yes, there's a milk producer as well, was interested in it because in this part of France they produce a lot of cheese and everything. And so it scaled the thing up, really. So yes, you can see the value of collective self-supply there. Is that all you wanted to say? Yes, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. So we're staying out in the countryside with you, Jordan Matarodo. You are director of the Corbières Fenouillèdes Regional Nature Park. We've already mentioned your project a little bit this morning. So it's a nature park, and it is the driving force behind a collective self-supply project in this rather nice village. Yes, we are located between the Pyrenees and the Aude. We are in a very rural area. If we have villages with 50 or 100 people living in them, and the region is in the lower mountains. It's really well protected, and we have populations but no industry, and so that's why we've turned it into a nature park. And so the constraints are rather substantial, in fact, in terms of energy transition. The advantage for us is our heritage, the diversity of our landscapes, but it means that we cannot, or we do not want to develop wind turbines. Although the councillors want us to be in a energy positive region by 2030, so we have to find ways of producing electricity locally, and rooftops are perfect for this, and everybody agrees about this. And so we suggested to make joint orders for PV panels to put them on public buildings, and we wanted to go beyond that. We are pilots. We're experimenting with this collective self-supply on a larger scale, and our desire is to test the social aspects of governance, organisation, and all of the questions that Clémence was talking about. So how do you get together and establish what the energy price is going to be? You have to take equilibrium, social issues. How do you share out to the slices of that energy cake? Who's producing? Who's invoicing? What do you do if people don't pay their bills? All of these questions. And what kind of governance are we going to be talking about? All the things which Clémence talked about earlier on. So we are betting that when you become a producer, you are concerned about when you produce, when you consume, and even without having too many tools about optimizing the different types of consumption, we can put your washing machine on when it's appropriate. So this is a subject which we want to broach. So we contacted the different councils and we invited them to test this. We've got 5 sites for our project, our pilot. There are the orange circles there, further ahead in the process, and we're talking about 10 to 20 kilometers radius each time, 1, 2, 3, 4 communes each time. How many buildings? Well, the 50 buildings have been studied. Not all of them will be fitted, of course, so that's quite a lot of work. We've got producers, consumers. These are technical studies which have been carried out quite in detail, because we have to be able to define who's going to produce what, who's going to consume what throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, so we can share things out equally, and so we can have an optimum balance between production and consumption to maximize this self-supply rate, to make sure that it's going to be economically viable. The councillors and the residents don't want to waste money and lose money in these operations. So the schedule is long-term. We started out in 2021, mainly because it's taken a long time to get people on board. We really had to start explaining. These notions are very, very technical. When you go to talk about your local baker, for example, or when you're talking to the resident or the person who works in the town hall, you have to understand where the electrons are going, how they get blocked, how the governance is working, the legal aspect, administrative questions, technical issues. All of these things need to be explained. It's very, very difficult to explain. We took the time. We had field trips. We took councillors and people who were interested to other regions to see how things worked out there. We had a lot of meetings where we were explaining things about the different tools that had to be put in place. And so we've got 3 territories now that are in the operational phase. And we are now currently thinking about how we can put in the statutes, how we can create an association, and all of these questions of how we share out the energy and what the price of that energy will be. And these are the most complicated phases, of course, because there are several profiles around the table. So you've got these 3 loops. How much power are we talking about? Oh, not very much. 380 kilowatts at peak time, so it's not at all the high power levels which we've heard mentioned. But it does cover quite a lot of self-supply. In the first pioneers, those councillors and residents who wanted to start. So you've got 39 consumers. Who are these consumers? Are they citizens? Are these residential buildings? Are these SMEs? Who have you got? Well, we've got 3 projects which are well advanced. We've got 3 different profiles. We've got one village where it really is the citizens who are the driving force. The town hall's not really involved at all. It's the citizens there. The residents wanted to get organised. And there we can feel that kind of farmer's basket atmosphere that Clémence was talking about before. How can we produce locally? How can we share that energy out locally? And then there's a second profile where we've got the town halls, which have seeing the cost of living going up, seeing that the local bakers having difficulty paying their bills, and they want to help their craftsmen, their tradesmen to have electricity which is less expensive, but which is under control over time, so that they're not suffering from inflation. That really is the local mayor who wants to help the village baker, for example, the last remaining village baker. And the final profile is a combination of the 2. We've got some citizens, we've got some tradesmen, we've got a farmer, and there's a mix of all of these. And here we see very complex issues of how do you make this very profitable for the producer who's producing the electricity. The PV panels have to generate revenue for the producer, but then how do we attract new citizens to join the loop with prices that are going to be appealing? There's another interesting thing with collective self-supply. That's equal access to green electrons. You're in a region where you have these Cathar castles where you can't put PV panels. It's just not accepted for aesthetic reasons. And so you have to put the PV panels elsewhere. I think you're on the UNESCO heritage list. So people who live in these villages cannot put PV panels on their roofs, but they could benefit from green electricity thanks to the collective self-supply because the panels would be remote. Yeah, these are Cathar castles there for the villages. We want to protect these pieces of our heritage. However, they want to be able to consume green electrons, and thanks to this collective self-supply, we'll be able to manage that. If there's a commune near one of these castles, they will be able to have some equipment on the ground, for example. We really do feel in all of these small communes with about 50 or 100 residents, we can feel that they want to produce energy locally. So let's wrap up now, shall we? What would you like to say? Well, it takes a long time, but it's very enriching, extremely interesting. It's a huge collective human adventure. There are some very complex aspects, but it's very enriching for everybody. Even at the end of 2 years, we have still got our pioneers with us who were there from the outset, so they are still as motivated as ever. It does take a long time, but you will soon come to fruition. Clémence, I would like to say the important role played by the regional nature park, because your park really brings together these 3 loops. They're all moving forward, not always at the same pace, but we've got all of this thanks to the nature park, and it's great to bring the communes together. So yes, well done to the nature park. And we would like to thank our partners. We couldn't do this without the support of the ECLR, which Clémence represents, and also we've got Innova, our legal experts as well, and the financial support from the ADEME, the state and the region. Well done for the great team. I think let's give them all a round of applause. Frédéric Leclerc, have you got a microphone there? Let's pass the microphone to Frédéric. Oops, I'm losing all of my papers and everything. Can you hear me still? Very good. So, Rémi Bastien, you are the president and co-founder of Enogrid. You are involved in collective self-supply, obviously. Perhaps you can tell us a little about your project, a peri-urban project. Yes, I represent Enogrid, and I want to give you some feedback. I'm going to talk about a global feedback of collective self-supply. We've been involved in that for 5 years, and then I will be talking about business parks, feedback from business parks, for example. So we were present 5 years ago. We've now got 30 people working for us. We've got about 280 projects which we've worked on throughout France. And at Enogrid, we work with projects at each phase, from validation all the way through to operations. And then when we're talking about operations, we've got over 60 projects that we're working with. And after the energy crisis, we have also developed a software which is called Enolab, and that is used by about 70 different energy professionals to scale up these collective self-supply projects. So as far as feedback is concerned, we see that there is a lot of enthusiasm in the collective self-supply market. The first years were a little bit kind of quiet, and the initial definition of collective self-supply was rather restricted. Things need to be improved still, but the framework is very efficient. And in terms of growth, we're at over 150% increase. We've got a lot of projects in France. There are about 10 more projects than last year, and collective self-supply accounts for 4,000 sites throughout France. And so the ball is rolling there, and we can see that the power of the operations is increasing very, very regularly. 30% increase in power on average in 1 year. That's due to different things, particularly the option of doing collective self-supply in medium voltage projects. And so we're having bigger projects now, 1 mega, 2 mega, 3 megawatts, which weren't possible before 2021. And so now we really are scaling things up. So it's no longer these really small projects. No. We know what the context is. I don't need to go into the details there. There's a lot of high demand by landowners who want to get value out of their electrons locally, and the consumers are also keen about this. So once you've talked about what it involves and taught everybody, it's becoming easier to convince the consumer to come and join these projects to have locally produced electricity at a good price. We have once the subject of finance has been sorted out, who's going to be the producer. Once that's been sorted out, we have never seen a project fail because we've never found any consumers. That's not the case. And we've been working with projects for several years now, and none of our operations have been halted because there aren't any consumers. So the operation has always gone ahead. So for 5 years, we see that there's a lot of feedback from our operations. We've been able to classify the different profiles of collective self-supply. There are some simple models which are spearheaded by the town hall, or there are social projects. We have backers that are heavily involved because it's much simpler for them to be in charge of the project, to combat against the people to help people, to make sure that everybody has access to electricity. And then there are more complex projects where the contract's a bit more complex. But these subjects here are better managed. We have some examples. We've got the lawyers who've done their job. We've got organising parties that are well regulated, and we've got ready to roll projects as well, turnkey projects which are also ready off the shelf. Another accelerator over recent years for collective self-supply is compatibility with the S21 obligatory prices. In the past, we had to have a private buyer with a contract from 1 to 3 years, and the bankers didn't really like that because they had no visibility with that. But with the S21, we now have the option of saying that we are going to fund our project on the S21, and then we will maximize the yield for different reasons, and the banker doesn't need to know that it's collective self-supply. And then, on top of this, there are other projects which are not S21, but where the funding is managed on a case-by-case basis. If there's a big development, we're going to have a big power plant which is going to fund a smaller plant for collective self-supply, and then we have to commit the consumers on the long term so that we can secure the funding. So collective self-supply, by its nature, it means that it's safer, really, isn't it? You've only got one player. Well, I'm convinced of that. The bankers aren't so convinced, but the bankers like to have a lot of security. They want to make sure that electricity is going to be sold at a good price. But the local recent laws, the law of acceleration, means that in the future, local councils will be able to purchase electricity from private players in a long-term contract. And for those projects which are not valid for S21, they will have the guarantee for their investors that the local council next door, for example, will self-supply 20% of their production for 20 years, let's say. The state is not obliged to purchase that, but it will help funding. And I also want to talk about a collective self-supply operation in a semi-urban area. I want to illustrate several points. The dynamic is no longer spearheaded by the town hall. It can be industrialists, for example, who are spearheading these operations. And I want to talk about the time scale also. Some collective self-supply operations can take time to set up when it's the first time. And we have developed over the last 5 years a methodology which we're in an industrial scale now, and now we can see that collective self-supply is no longer on the critical scale. whereby we're talking about connecting production up to the grid. The deadline, the time scale is stretching, but here 6 months, 9 months, 1 year of time taking to link it up and produce. It gives you enough time to do all of the paperwork. And so we've got an example which involves 4 industrialists who at the outset had projects for individual self-supply, but then they decided instead to avoid any surplus costs because they were only consuming at certain times of the year or certain times of the week, and so they wanted to optimize the excess that they were producing locally. And so they went to talk with their neighbors, and for the time being, with their capacity, we are starting 148 kilowatts peak, and we're going to work with 6 neighboring industrialists who are going to use that energy when the site is not using it. So the excess energy will go to the neighbors. And when there are several players, they have set up an association, as is usually the case, and they're going to be the intermediary. And on the timeline, we can see that this project was brought out very, very quickly. The first study was carried out in July 2022, and collective self-supply started in September 2023. So it didn't take very long at all. So we were waiting for connection up to Enedis a bit longer. We finalized all that in under 1 year. Everything that was in terms of collective self-supply organization, that was all settled. And then we had to wait for 2 or 3 months for everything to be triggered. So it can go very quickly. Yes, people are saying that it takes a long time, but here, when everyone's committed, things can move very quickly. Yes, when everyone's committed and when you have firm players, we try to bring around the table about 100 players. That would have been very, very difficult. But because we started with just a small amount of energy, with a small number of players, it can go much quicker. And then after that, collective self-supply has the advantage of evolving over time. In the future, our industrialists can say, well, I want to increase the size of my power station and involve more producers and more consumers. And to talk about questions which may be coming in the future in terms of prices, the big advantage for these industrialists is that they are in individual self-supply, whereas their power plant is below 100. And if you took then those characteristics, you've got 7 to 8 kilowatt per hour, but in the collective, it's up to 200. No, rather, it's 2 centimes. Rather than 7 or 8 centimes, it's going to be 2 centimes. So the price is much more advantageous. And for the consumer, it's much less than what they pay traditionally. And so it's a win-win situation for the producer and for the consumers. So everybody is happy. And a couple of words to wrap up. Well, that's all I wanted to say. Let's leave time for questions. Well, thank you very much for Rémi Bastien. Let's applaud Enogrid. So we've got 5 minutes remaining. A question. Let's take a look here. Kindly introduce yourself, please. Thank you very much. Sylvie Perrin. I work for a lawyer's company, a lawyer's firm. Thank you, Rémi. You've talked about this question of excess energy and how you finance that and manage that. But for other project leaders, how do you finance these projects? How did everyone find their financing models? And before you talked about the S21, how do you best sell that excess energy? There's always going to be a percentage there. How do you get money out of that excess energy that you've created? Who would like to answer that? Clémence. Well, we've got a very concrete example. There's a small village north of Montpellier, Pic-Saint-Loup. At the very beginning, they were wondering what kind of project to have. They have PVs on the ground. And they decided that initially it had to be the villagers who would take advantage of that. But there was a stumbling block because they've only got 50. They've got 50 villagers for a plant, so there's a lot of energy, excess energy, and so they've got a buyer who's buying all of their excess. And so 90% of the excess energy is bought by Enercop. Enercop is going to do that. It's going to and if it's saying if that maintains the equilibrium of your project, and if we are guaranteed to have locally produced energy in Languedoc-Roussillon, then it's great for us to help find that equilibrium, and we will buy your excess energy. So even if an energy looks like it won't work, there is always going to be a solution. So in Languedoc-Roussillon, that's what ENOCOP has said, to make sure that equilibrium is guaranteed and so that they too are benefiting from this excess energy, which is produced by a tiny village. So over how many years is their contract? Well, they're negotiating that right now. ENOCOP is committing to the long term. And there are people from ENOCOP in the room, so you can always contact them afterwards. We'll talk about that afterwards. So there are some hostesses which will bring the microphones to you. So wait for the hostess to bring you a microphone. Please say who you are. Hello. I'm a project engineer from the Lot region. I've got a question for Mr. Leclerc, the lawyer. In terms of the legal situation today, there are certain constraints in terms of the perimeters of the project. The current perimeter is a certain number of kilometers. There's a waiver for 20 kilometers, but this waiver isn't always accepted. And there are also projects which are not eligible for this S21 obligatory purchase clause. So is there going to be any evolution in the law? Because that will encourage different projects for the time being. There's so what's the future of the legal framework looking like? Did you get that question? Did you hear it? Yeah, turn the volume up on your headphones. So you can. So I want to know how. My first question is how is regulation going to change with regards to that 2-kilometer law? There are waivers for 20, but the waiver isn't always applied, and there's always very many conditions. Not everybody can benefit from that waiver. So I want to know whether that perimeter is going to be extended. And also there are some ground projects for power stations on the ground. They do not benefit from that obligatory purchase clause. And so how are people going to get money from that excess energy which is produced on the ground? So what's the regulation? Are the regulations going to evolve? Because that will really boost the number of projects that are launched. I would say, kindly speak directly into the microphone. Well, you just need to look over your shoulder to find the answer to that. If we take a look back and we see how legislation has evolved in terms of collective self-supply, we realize that regulation has constantly become more flexible to foster collective self-supply operations. At the beginning, the scope of collective self-supply was a building, and then we extended that to a larger perimeter. And since September 2023, we've extended the perimeter to 10 kilometers. That's new. That's been introduced with the 20-kilometer perimeter also. So I think if we continue along this track, the perimeters will be extending as long as the technology follows suit. And I think we can give the same answer to that obligatory buyback clause. This kind of operation has been very difficult in the past in terms of costs and the profitability of the operation. So in my mind, when we're talking about those ground PVs, sooner or later, we will have to include them into the obligatory buyback of the electricity which is produced. Well, thank you very much for your optimism. Any further questions? A quick question, quick answer.
Est-ce qu'il y a beaucoup de questions?
I work for a public company in the Malinois region. We work on developing energies, and we do third-party investment to deploy investments in the region, and we would like to see the development of self-supply areas, but what are the legal aspects that allow you to develop collective loops in the case where the consumer is different from the producer, whilst respecting the parameters of public orders, whereby you have to allow for some competition in energy suppliers? Here in Occitania, we have already set up a collective self-consumption project with some local authorities. So it's been tried already. But you are right, when you have this type of self-supply project, you have no waiver from the public tender system. And there is no change with that respect. A guide has been put up in the Rhône-Alpes region. It's called "How Can You Succeed Your Self-Supply Project?" And it shows all the legal aspects, and it brings practical answers to these questions. Jean-Christophe, president of the Association of the Haute-Vallée Cévenol, we have a project covering 17 sites for self-supply. I would like some clarification regarding PMO. PMO can manage several operations. You don't need one PMO per operation. And you mentioned a structure of association. Can you be more precise as to what type of structures would be necessary? Regarding PMO, it is true that the structure that is very frequent is that of association, because that type of association is easier to put in place, and it's more flexible as well. When you have several operations for collective self-supply, you could federate them, group them around one PMO, and it is quite possible in the framework of one association. It's been done in the Parc de Fenouillèdes. If you adapt the governance of the association, for instance, by organizing various groups within the association, because each loop may have its specific requirements or constraints. So it's interesting to sectorize the various types of operations within the PMO. Clémence, there is an operation in Rennes, in the city of Rennes, and it has two loops with under the cover of one single association. As Mr. Leclerc said, they make an assembly of perimeters. They have one legal structure, so they can simplify their cost structure. But when you are the consumer in one loop, you cannot manage the other loop. So it's quite clear. Etienne de Balsa. When we work in the tertiary, you cannot organize a collective operation. If you have a case of some offices with one owner and several renters, you cannot be covered by the tertiary decree. Is this to change anytime soon? No, I'm not aware of any change, but it will have to change sooner or later so as to encourage that type of operations. I think that the present context means that things are going to change fast. Thank you. We only have to thank all of you now. Frédéric Leclerc, Innova, Clémence Squid-Poncelin, Eclair Network, Benoît Froduro, Smart Grid Service in the CEA, David Ojegs, President of Incidence, Jordan Madazardo, Deputy Director of the Parc Naturel Régional Fenouillèdes, and Rémi Bastien, President of Enogrid. Thank you, and we can keep talking together after this conference. Thank you.